somehow pitch, not pitch my company, but a very specific element of our product as being a problem, a general problem with, obviously, as the headline says, third-party dependencies, but it can also be probably on a more abstract level related to, let's say, offline processes that creates very nasty dependencies for product development sometimes. So I heard there's like someone from Share Now in there, or even like getting some product into actually offline stores. Maybe there's some connections to it, we'll see. So I will quickly present what our problem is, then already say a little bit of our approach, how we tackle that, but might already include some failures that we did. And then I will end the presentation with an open question where I'm really interested in general feedback or your experience, basically. That's kind of the flow. First, you need to a little bit understand what we are doing. So as I mentioned, it's e-commerce-like platform which sells cars, and selling cars is not necessarily correct. So we're just focusing on the leasing industry, which is a credit product, you could say so. So it's coming from a bank. So just to very quickly sum it up, how the real process in the real world looks like is the customer goes to a dealership being like a classical auto house where you can basically look into cars. There's a dude who gives you some consulting about the car to basically give recommendations, and the dealership. And there comes the first major point that creates problems for us, is the only entity that can actually order cars. So there's a legal limitation to actually going into that industry and selling cars, because dealerships are the only ones who can actually place the order at the manufacturer. And then if you are talking about leasing, there's another player, which is the bank, which is offering the financial products to actually lease a car for the dealership and then also for the customer. So that's also in the equation. And the dealership just has an interface towards the bank to basically go into the banking system, print out some lease contracts, let the customer sign it, and then the customer goes happy away with the lease contract and the car combined. That's kind of the real world process. So we as a product, this is basically our platform, as I mentioned, like some kind of shop exploration phase platform with the transaction process. And that's where the big problem comes. We basically tried to solve it. First, we tried to solve the whole pricing thing, because if you go to a dealership, you ask for a Golf, and then for leasing, then you get a price tag of $399, and then you say, great or not great, you probably don't know. So there's a big question mark around the price because you don't really have a relation to it. So we solve that on the platform by showing you the lowest prices in the market available without you negotiating the price. But the more critical element is, because that we solved somehow with the product, is getting that one out of the equation, which is the offline process in a dealership. So like the transaction process, so to say, which I try to describe with dealership and bank being some kind of parties in there. So in ideal world, or not an ideal world, in the real world, what we did, we put us on top of that process, that offline process, let's call it that for now, and put the customer out of the equation, put the customer into our platform. So we are basically sourcing the customer with marketing activities. And then we go into the dealership by giving them some kind of back office tool. This is basically our B2B app for the dealerships to handle all the customer inbound in a more streamlined and efficient way. But still, and this is a big problem, there's basically then to get the lease contracts from the bank, because a lease contract is regulated by the BaFin, which is like the banking regulation institute product that has to follow some guidelines, and that only those guidelines can be like a designated bank, or only a designated bank can fulfill those guidelines, which is why there's even another problem in that customer journey, that the bank requires an identified customer. And an identified customer means literally, or usually, the customer is in front of the dealership person or the sales agent in the dealership, shows his passports and does the contract, and all this stuff works. Then the bank is happy and then hands out the lease contract. But in the online world, it is not possible in that way, obviously, because the customer is on our platform, not at the dealership somewhere in Germany. Usually would think then, okay, there's online solutions for that, like video identification, all that stuff. Technology is available. That's not a big problem. But the problem is, again, the external third parties like banks and dealerships who are not ready for that digitalization, or who probably even don't want to be ready for third-party platforms or platform approaches to use a direct connection to the bank. And this customer journey leads to a time for the customer to actually place the order in a final form that is legally binding for like 3 to 5 days. So as you can imagine, on a digital product, it's a gigantic problem. Like a customer journey after you made the decision to actually go with that car still takes 3 to 5 days, because you have to send that contract that you get through our platform, so we can upload it there by the dealership, but you have to send it by post to the bank, because you need an identification process in there, which only can be delivered by post ident. So you have to go to the post office, identify yourself with your passport, send the lease contract in there, and then you're basically legally on the safe side from banking point of view. So this is basically the customer journey dilemma. I don't want to talk about this specific dilemma, but in general about a dilemma like that, how to solve that. So according to Bill Gates, we did something stupid. We tried to automate an efficient operation, which according to him will just magnify the inefficiency. So there's like the process below that is basically the same. We just source the customer in a digitalized way, let's say. So what's the ideal world? The ideal world is basically having direct relationships to the blocking entities in a smarter way. So we would love to cooperate with banks. We would love to have the dealership just in the equation to say, okay, please order the car, but there's nothing else for you to be done there. Everything else is already solved. So we just use that entity. And that would lead to a, let's say, roughly 50-minute process. So what did we do? Obviously, or not obviously, but what we did is approach banks and try to figure out a cooperative solution. So we went into corporations. And the first corporation was our MVP as well, how to solve the customer journey dilemma for good. And probably most of you have never heard of it, but we did the cooperation with Lidl, a big retailer all over the world, I assume, and a big bank, which is Santander. So they basically jumped onto the train. Okay, we like that. You digitalize basically the customer sourcing, and you have an idea how that product can look like. We don't have anything, but we somehow give you access to a limited amount of our back office workflows to basically create a lease contract. And also we give you the right to do the digital signing and a video identification with some of the providers who fall under the regulated umbrella of the BaFin, which is in that case ID Now. So we built that product, which was an amazing success. We did the 15-minute case, so that was possible. Lease a contract in 15 minutes on site with end-to-end customer journey, orders placed, everything works like a charm. Gigantic PR buzz for us, everything looks perfect. So we went into some kind of euphoria phase, I would call it. So we were very happy about the success. So what usually happens in small startups, I assume, especially when there's a bullish CEO in place, you end up jumping on that potential path of cooperating with banks because there's a lot of potential in there. So we had 2 banks after that PR buzz that wanted to invest in us. Of the banks that we actually want to cooperate with, there's probably 12 in the market that are interesting for us to have smart corporations. And 3 to 4 new MVP cases with potential banks in a similar way like we did with Santander in the making. I was basically from head of product point of view already shifting a dedicated team towards that transaction part, like really focus on it, try to solve it, try to go into cooperation with banks. And after 1 year, so let's say this is how somehow we started. So those were the action items. We really made it a very main strategic point for our roadmap. We came back to reality. The MVP products were only capturing roughly 0.05% of the offers of our platform. So there's because we had to cooperate with those big banks and we do everything and you give us what you have, so you don't have any efforts. And in the end, the outcome was we can sell one specific car on that path with the online transaction, but everything left and right doesn't scale with the bank because there's nothing in place on the bank side. So we built basically campaign MVPs in a very limited fashion. But before the case, we built that, the bank will jump on the train, then develop with us and go into big corporations, and we do this together somehow. After that 1 year, only one bank of the potential 12 saw, or like every bank is potentially seeing every bank potentially sees the potential. That's not a good sentence, but every bank sees what we're doing there, but only one is basically open up for corporations and giving us the connection points to make that transaction in a scalable way for more offerings. And probably the most important part, and this is where I want to start the discussion, is that we literally, on that customer journey dilemma that I tried to explain at the beginning, that we basically have a 3 to 5 days transaction part that we cannot really get out of the equation without banks cooperating with us directly. At least that's the assumption. We didn't do any improvements on one of our core USPs, because from what we claim as a company is we are the only ones who do somehow do the online transaction, because every other competitor stops way earlier, like basically lead gen. So you're basically a lead gen to the dealership, and then you can call him and do the same negotiations that you had to do before there was just an offline market. Yeah, but because we jumped on that cooperation train and hype and idea, we missed out a lot of, or potentially a lot of improvements that we could still have done in a different way instead of cooperating. So I'm just curious what you think, like when you have those heavy external dependencies to basically fulfill your strategic, I would not call it a vision, but at least the idea of how your product should work in the future in an effectively way, because obviously what we did was a lot of hyping and trying to get into corporations, like more business development, but with a lot of product involved, and then kind of failed and are not back to zero. So we did a lot of learnings, but kind of in the same position as we were like probably 14 months ago. Please ask questions and share experience or ideas of first feedback.
You were talking about the cooperations and dependency on third parties. I understand that. Yeah. It seems like you're not where you would like to be. I'm asking, are there any, I mean, you were talking about driving users using different marketing. I can presume SEM, SEO, traffic. Do you have any indication that users are interested to go through this process, that users were converting in some numbers?
I mean, if you talk generally like about the idea of having that automotive buying process online, there's a product market fit. So there's a lot of competition already. So people are shifting to online buying or online leasing, how I call it. So that's the thing, and that's a big thing. And there's also like the market trend is pointing into that direction.
The selling point to the banks and to the dealers, do you already have like fleshed out what would be in for them?
It's a very tricky industry, so we could discuss that for a very long time. But in a nutshell, we help dealerships scale, obviously, their online business, because the competition is increasing, dealership numbers is reducing. That's even aligned with the manufacturer strategy. So there's less and less dealerships, so they have to get a little bit out of their geographical zone, what they had before. So we are only cooperating with very big dealership groups even, so not just like a single dealership somewhere in Hamburg or in Kiel or wherever, but with dealerships group to basically use their network and just scale their online business. So it's we are basically their online marketing arm, if you could say. So that's the pitch, and that's why we're also sticking to the customer journey. We also help we put it hot offers in the market. Sometimes there's crazy deals in the market, and then there's a big run on it. So you basically can track even the traffic just for that one deal ending up on every platform that is offering those cars. And with our, let's say, B2B application for the dealer, we are preparing the deals in a way that are completely executable. So the dealer literally has to do just monkey work there. This is just typing into the systems, typing into the bank system, printing out the contract, sending it to our platform. But everything before is basically perfectly accurate. So he doesn't have to do anything there. So that's an advantage for the dealer, but we are mainly focusing still on the customer side. So trying to solve it there.
I just wondered how you could increase the pressure on the banks and dealers to change and adopt with just increasing the pure number of people that go through your funnel. And so we have suppliers that offer a digital service that is completely fake, but still attractive because now we don't have to do it and they do it. And I wonder if you could basically fake more of your digitalization to increase the number of people that you can operate in, and basically convince with those number of people those more hard to move third parties.
Yeah, exactly. That would be like, I have in theory like a kind of backup slide where I have like 3 areas which we could have or could still discuss, and one of them is like the creative solutions, I would say, where we can a little bit empower yourself from a product point of view. So we had the idea of going into some kind of power of attorney setup. So basically, we try to bypass the legal constraints and become the only party that needs to identify for the bank, because we do everything for the customer up front. And we would create a huge back office to do all the paperwork and stuff. But also there, we tried some test cases in the market, and the problem is the banks can just forbid it if they want. So the risk is always so high if you invest in such creative ideas as well, to bypass basically the legal limitations that we currently have. Because if a bank doesn't like us, and to be fairly honest, this is what is happening currently in the market. If you're like an online platform for automotive sales and offer crazy prices, the manufacturer is not always happy about it. The non-manufacturer banks don't care, but the manufacturer banks, for example, VW or Mercedes or BMW, care about their product in the market, and they don't want to be too cheap in the market. But the price is coming from them. That's the fun part about it. But they don't want to be. They don't want the price to be so transparent. So there's a lot of politics involved, that the bank is not really somehow interested in the cooperation because they like the digital thing. So that's where we started working on MVPs. But then again, putting our product on top of that with offering basically the lowest prices in the market, that's where they basically stop. And then they start, okay, we cannot do that with our sales department. We cannot do that with our image that we have, or the brand awareness that we have currently in the market. And then it always boils down to a lot of discussions, MVP discussions. We were in a lot of departments within the manufacturer, banks, talking about amazing projects. But then at some point, someone put like basically the stop sign on that project, and stopped like after 9 months of already cooperating somehow on an early stage. And the problem with that is, for those corporations, you cannot really do just biz dev, because it's always very product related, because you always have to, on a very early stage, always discuss product related topics, how to integrate, what's even possible, how could the MVP look like. So I was always basically going out there as head of product with Lucas, our founder, and we were just doing this as sparrings partners to basically try to get a foot in the door, like always with a product approach, but obviously it's also very business development like what we did there.
It seems that you're stuck between a rock and a hard place, and the rock is the dealers, and the hard place is the banks. Like
in our occasion, we don't need the dealer at all. Yeah, it's just the dealer is just the legal entity who is allowed to order cars from the manufacturer. That's a license agreement. So you're basically a licensed dealership for VW, and then you are an entity that can actually order a car at the manufacturer. That's the setup. So in order to get a license, you have to literally build a dealership with a lot of CI regulations and all that stuff. So that's not an option for us, especially not for 24 brands that we currently offer on the website. But that's the only thing why we, in theory, need the dealership to make a lease contract with a car order for a customer.
And your main problem is the bank now, or the banks?
Yeah, main problem is the bank, because the dealership would play with us and just place the order. So he would be happy, because with every order he does, he gets some kind of commission, which is fine for him. So if we can just give him completely finalized orders with already lease contracts in place, he would be just happy and press the button all the time and print money, more or less.
Okay, so the dealer is not the problem, the bank is the problem, and it's a connectivity/political problem.
Yeah.
Is there some exclusivity in the banks? Like, I mean, you said you had Santander on board, right?
Yeah.
Running full, it's working, running, enabling you to work with multiple brands, or just one brand.
Yeah, that's a way to go basically with the non-manufacturer banks that in theory can create a lease offer for every car that is available in the market. So they just print out lease contracts. They don't care what brand it is. But the problem with the industry is that manufacturer banks are the only ones who can give special discounts on certain cars. So that the market drivers in terms of pricing is always the manufacturer bank. So we cannot get it out of the equation in terms of competing with the market prices. So if we just do, okay, we do everything with Santander and everything's digital, and the Golf on our platform costs 250 euros instead of 150, as an example.
I think there are two things that come to mind. One of them is whether there is an opportunity. So you mentioned the funnel, you mentioned 15 minutes with your MVP. I'm thinking about what that funnel is, whether you can move that to a different place, right? So splitting the customer and cutting it short by saying, well, you're done, and then we're going to take a slower process with the bank, however we do it, and confirm it later. Whether you actually need the user to continue being part of a longer process, or can you get everything you need earlier on? And then the other bit that might be relevant is whether one thing that we've been considering in N26, for example, could be around providing identification services in the future, right? Whether you could use the identification aspect of a bank or a bank startup like we are, and then have other banks kind of say, well, this is fine, right? Because we are an official bank and regulated and so on as a service, whether that might be something that will fly better.
Just to have like a big party who already does it like in your pocket to just make the showcase more trustable, let's say, right?
Yeah, instead of having to deal with the regulation around managing PII, around being someone that went and had to be bank certified for having real authentication and identification and certification and re-verification processes, whether or not you could rely on a service like that is completely detached from the aspect of having to do business with a bank. And I'm sure there might be more than just banks that would be in that area.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah,
we got to a part where we can onboard new customers within 8 minutes for a bank account. So it is possible to do these things fairly quickly.
I was interested in the core thing that makes you trouble. You said banks make trouble. What exactly is the point that you feel blocked and when you cannot grow and scale? You said the discounts that you need to be comparable in pricing to the market, you cannot get from average banks, but from manufacturing banks. Okay, but there's also a few. And what is the trouble? What's the point? They don't want to play with you, so you cannot have the competitive prices, or they block the business that you have. I didn't understand what is actually that really blocks in.
It's exactly like this is the ticking point. I mean, when we built that MVP, everyone was interested in us, also the manufacturer banks, because they were a little bit behind in terms of having that digital, let's say, checkout process or transaction process by themselves. So they thought they could accelerate their internal development with the help of us by building that MVP also with them. So that was our like foot in the door. But obviously they are building that as well by themselves. So that's not rocket science. I mean, having some kind of a digital signing process and contract creation process, that's not rocket science. So they are also building it by themselves. But then they basically lock you out. So they believe, as a manufacturer bank, we can build our own website where we do online retail at some point. So we don't want any third-party platforms having the same easy flows as we do. So it's kind of a lockout strategy. But in all the discussions, they were kind of, I think they were even unsure about it by themselves. So like sometimes they were saying yes, and sometimes they were saying no, because they were just trading, like doing the trade-off. Do we want to accelerate and have an e-commerce-like approach, or do we want to build it internally and have a very strict, slow banking approach, which is digital, but you have to create an account here, then you have to come back here, then do the identification, and then you get the contract presented. Also their digital approach is, I would say, very bank-like and not as sexy as we did it with the MVP. That's the struggle they had. Basically, we had the struggle and the bank had the struggle, and we couldn't make the move.
So it will be very harsh, but maybe stop to lease things, rent things, sell things. Why? If you say that they copy you with a such budget they have, stop this. Why to go this way? You identify for yourself already very hard to compete in this market. A good price you cannot have because they block you. A good service they don't have. No, okay, so do something completely different. Take the customer. The story about the car. Fair.com doesn't lease you. They just rent you a car for 6 days and use it. Maybe this is a shift, excluding the problems that you have instead of on the problems for 1 year.
Sure, fair point. The solution to that is subscription models, as you mentioned, fair. So that's a big thing in the market. We don't necessarily believe the full hype around it. So there's a problem with the way of if you go into subscription, because you then become not asset light anymore. I mean, you can also source cars for different products and then can finance that. But the sourcing becomes completely different, and the current market situation is because of the leasing markets steered by discounts and banks. You have way more attractive prices in the lease business than if you would do it somehow by yourself and bet on customer journey. I mean, there's players, especially in the German market, like Cluno. You mentioned Fair. They basically exactly made that move. They have said customer experience is more important. We do some smart asset management by buying cars cheap and then get low, somehow comparable rates. But then you instantly become very asset heavy. And we want to be basically asset light because we believe there's still the need of a comparison platform. So maybe the main product is also for us the comparison platform. So that's a little bit to be discussed, but that's the other side of our product. It's not just about the transaction process, obviously. So the main thing is we make the market transparent, and we could easily put also subscription things in there. But somehow we would love to be something like Check24 at some point, to like for all those products that we at some point can compare on our platform, have deeper integrations to still go in the direction of customer journey. So it's a little bit probably not so smart because it's a very bumpy and stony road, but it's kind of written into the vision and mission of our company, and it's what the founders believe in, which is why we stick onto it, at least for now.